Ever wondered how your favorite clothing brands actually work behind the scenes? How are clothes even designed and made? Make the Dot co-founders Emilie and Theren Moodley talk with designers behind the most well-known brands and design institutions to get to know the humans behind the garments. Tune in to go deep with topics covering hopes, dreams, creativity, and work nightmares.
Okay. Welcome to Makers of Fashion, where we bring you the stories and the humans behind your favorite fashion brands. I'm your host, Emilie Ho. No, I'm joking. I'm Theren Moodley. And with these, my co-host, Emilie Ho. Say hi, Emilie.
Hi, everyone.
And this episode is brought to you by us, Make the Dot, collaborative canvas for fashion designers. Make the Dot helps you save 5 hours a week in your workflow, allowing designers to be more creative and come up with better products. Now, that's enough of the plug. Let's get back to the show. With us today is one of our favorite people at the moment.
Thank you.
No stranger, Andrea Skillings.
Hi.
Andrea has worked across design, product development, merchandising with renowned brands such as Karen Lucas. And she's probably best known for a role in academia, both on the East Coast here in Lim College in New York and over on the West Coast with Academy of Art University. With a career that straddled both academia and industry, Andrea's focus is joining the gap between the two and getting the students for sometimes harsh realities of the industry. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for taking your afternoon to speak to us today. Without further ado, can you share with us what initially inspired you to begin your journey in fashion?
I mean, that's a tough question, actually, because I think essentially people just kind of decide one day, this is what I want to do. I want to be in fashion, right? But it's not really, you don't really know what it's all about until you're actually in it. Because in school, it's kind of this glamorous job that is kind of involving all sorts of fun events and, shopping in Europe and all that wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
So it seems really exciting. So I wouldn't say that there was any one event. I think when I was younger, it was something I always wanted to do. I loved the idea of working in fashion. Yeah. So that's where my college kind of leaded me, and then eventually moving to New York and working in the industry. I don't know. I wouldn't say that there was any passion behind a specific element. It was just a dream that I always had as a young child, I guess.
Do you think the industry is generally glamorized within popular culture, and that? I mean, I personally never started in the fashion industry, but for me, it was always glamorized and always part of popular culture in one shape or form. Do you reckon that sort of did that play a part in you deciding to pursue this role?
I mean, I think there's this idea of what fashion is and what it is to be a fashion designer.
Yeah.
And you see, I mean, this was prior to, essentially shows on TV that, kind of involved what could look like regular people working. But it just sort of is this really idealized industry where you can essentially do it all, so to speak. Yeah. But then you get into it and you realize it's a little different than that. It's not always it's not very glamorous at all, in fact.
Why do you reckon, maybe a tough one, why do you reckon there's such a disparity between what pop culture thinks fashion is and then when you get into the industry? Because they say the same thing about lawyers as well, right? Lawyers is one of the most... what they see a barrister on TV is nowhere near to what he's reading contracts and contracts and contracts. Why do you think that is for fashion, that there's this overplaying in pop culture, but then when you get into the industry, it's not the same at all?
I think a lot of it comes down to this idea of having your collection or being a business that can get your collections in New York Fashion Week or some other fashion week. You see essentially runway shows and you're like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm going to do. But then in reality, 80% of the industry is not that, right? Yeah. So brands like Levi's, Old Navy, J. Crew, nobody's really like that. And that's essentially really the meat and potatoes of the industry. But that's not what's on TV. That's not what you see. That's not what you read about. I mean, even if you think about like being in school and learning about fashion history, you learn about the bigger designers that are much more well known.
I you hit the nail on the head. We had one designer in our community who she had the same idolized view of industry and like Versace and all the hot couture, and then she got into the industry and she was like designing buttons for one of the bigger brands. I almost said the name as well. And she was designing buttons for one of the bigger brands, and then after like 3 years of designing buttons, and she moved on to polos, and then she was like, actually I quite like them on my polo, and then like this becomes like my blue polo, and then I like buy my significant other and my dad this blue polo, and then I start to love the blue polo, and after 10 years I can't think of anything else apart from my blue polo. But yeah, it's just interesting like how that dichotomy between
reality versus expectation.
Well, and even in that respect, I mean, a lot of time when you're in school, you're thinking you're going to just kind of like jump into your career and design everything. But the way the industry is broken down, I mean, you can very well just design polos nonstop. I mean, my first job was in boys' children's wear, ages 2 to 5.
Yeah.
My biggest excitement was like designing a snowman sweater. Right. Like, I mean, because the sweater was the same no matter what. It was just all about, but I mean, that's the job that I had. And so for 3 years, I designed sweaters and that was it. Boys' sweaters.
Interesting, because some of the designers that we spoke to actually quite enjoy children's wear because they get more of a license and is less rigid.
A little more freedom.
A little bit more freedom, right?
For sure. Yeah.
A little bit more freedom with the colors and the patterns and everything. But yeah, starting your career, like, so you started in children's wear, did that for a bit, and then...
I spent the majority of my career in children's wear industry. Quite honestly, I mean, I wanted, just like everybody else out of college, to be in women's wear, but that's just not where the jobs were headed. And out of school, I just jumped in. And I moved from Massachusetts to New York when I worked at Talbot's Kids, which I'm pretty sure there are no more around. But... I really enjoyed it for that reason. Like, we did get the opportunity to have a little more creative freedom. There were less restrictions. It wasn't as rigid as the women's wear industry. But as I was doing that and kind of, first started in boys, then moved to girls' dresses, I, kind of moved my way up the corporate ladder, so to speak. And I realized that training my assistant was the most exciting part of my job. And that I just really enjoyed something about like having somebody get excited about learning something new. And I liked to be able, because I had a very fortunate opportunity where I worked with somebody in a very similar way. Okay. So I was able to move up my career pretty successfully, pretty easily, because she kind of helped me along the way.
Yeah.
I wanted to do that for others, and then I realized that like this was way more fun than managing budgets, managing production calendars,
calendar.
That's right.
Calls from factories at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's when I transitioned into academia. I mean, I was lucky enough that I was at a company at the time that was very supportive of the direction that I wanted to take. So they allowed for me before. It was okay to work hybrid hours. Yeah. I was able to work hybrid and essentially teach 2 days a week and work like 4 days.
Okay.
So without impacting. And then eventually that turned into a full-time gig at Academy of Art when I moved cross country.
It's actually a really special thing that we noticed specifically in fashion because I personally didn't go to fashion schools, and a lot of my professors, they were purely academia. And I think in fashion, a lot of times you also have practitioners who are still in the industry, still designing, still working for brands, and then spend part of that time teaching. And I find that interesting because then you're much closer to what's happening, and you actually have industry experience. So surely I think that would help in your teaching.
I mean, I think it's beneficial for us as professionals as well as us as academics, because I think one, you're kind of introducing students to the realization of what goes on in the fashion industry. Like you can use your own work experiences to kind of explain topics or kind of get them to understand, take them into the office with you. But also like in a professional world, I mean, to have students understand that it's beneficial to them because as they go to intern, they have a better understanding of what's happening in business. They're not kind of they're always going to be green, but they're not going to be so green that they're completely oblivious to what goes on day-to-day operations. So, I mean, I think in fashion it is, especially, I mean, a lot in New York and then some in San Francisco, a lot of the professors are industry professionals or currently or were at one time, and they transitioned. And primarily because the idea of kind of taking your work environment and bringing it into the classroom is more important than fashion theory, so to speak.
Yeah. Do you think the industry prepares, or do you think the academia prepares the students well for industry?
I mean, I can be very subjective in that realm. So I can speak from my own,
Of course,
just speaking about my own professional experience. I mean, I think we do the best that we can to make sure that students are well prepared. I don't think that everybody does that. But I do think that one of our biggest goals in program building, in, student learning, is to make sure that they are not only aware of what really goes on in the industry, but has the most current technology skills. They're staying current. We are making sure that they will be relevant when they come into the industry. Like, teaching them the tools, teaching them kind of the processes, making sure it's more real life or real value experience as opposed to just textbook experience. I mean, quite honestly, a lot of times we don't even use textbooks. We focus, we don't. We focus a lot on, obviously we do, but there's a lot of case study based where it's like recent case studies. Okay. We do what we can to keep it as current as possible instead of just textbook based learning.
Yeah, because I remember when we were discussing a little bit a while ago now, students in university expected to create like one sample in a couple of weeks, but when they get into industry, that's like times by like 5 or 6.
Yes.
Right. And we hear a lot about designers burnt out, they're working out long hours, working overtime. Why do you think that is? Is it just the muscle memory? Is it that the workload is just insane in brands? Is it the processes? Is it a combination of the above? Why do you reckon that is?
I think it's both. I think processes are so archaic.
Okay.
I teach the product life cycle, and ironically, I'm going to kind of bash it, right? Like, that's
the real truth.
There's this like process of essentially like every step along the way, right? And you can't move forward to the next one so it's this really elongated calendar schedule where all of these things have to happen. And on average, when I was working, we were designing 200 styles a season.
Wow. Okay.
Right? So 200 styles a season that have to be on this calendar. Every fabric has a different lead time. Every trim has a different lead time. Like the approval process, all the tech packs that have to be created. It's a very grueling process. And everything moves really quickly. So it's like if you don't put in those extra hours, if you don't communicate with the factory regularly, there's problems. And then that just kind of trickles down into, like never ending problems. I can't say, I probably went through the burnout process at one point. Maybe that's part of the reason why I was so excited to get into academia. But I also think that was partially my own personal goal of like, I need to climb the corporate ladder as fast as I can. When in actuality, once I got there, I didn't like it.
It was, but the view wasn't too good.
Right. Like this conception of like, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
But, I was like, okay, well, I'll do whatever I have to do it. So that meant working 7 days a week, traveling to China 4 to 6 times a year. There was one year that I literally was in my apartment for probably 50 days out of 365 because I was constantly traveling to another country, because there were so many problems. And then like getting one-way tickets, which is the scariest thing ever because that means you don't know when you're coming back.
Is this to China?
China.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, it's just that, you know, because you end up traveling a lot, you end up kind of having to be the middleman and communicate with everybody. So it's a lot to take on. And I think you do burn out fast because there's not that even lifestyle. Like it's all go, 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 go. And I do think now that I've lived on both coasts, it's definitely go, go, go New York thing.
Yeah, it's New York thing.
I mean, not to say that, you know, California is all unicorns and rainbows, because it's not, right? Like, people still work hard, but there's an understanding of work-life balance a little bit more than here. In New York, it's literally like, if you're not willing to do it, somebody else is. So
that's just the general culture of things.
Yes.
Because Mikkel was on our show previously. She mentioned that she'd get like a project on her desk at like 5 p.m., 4 p.m., and then her manager would be like, oh, yeah, cool. Like, just have it ready by tomorrow.
Yeah.
And be like, what? Okay. I didn't get a chance to ask her that, so I'm going to ask you, why do you reckon that is? Like, is that just, why is it so disorganized, for want of a better phrase? I'm going to call it out. Like, why is it so disorganized? Like, why? Because obviously, I'm sure her manager, I'm sure when you were in that position, I'm sure when, like, your bosses were in that position, they didn't do that on purpose, right? No one wants to do that on purpose.
Right. But it happened.
But it happens.
Sure.
But it happens. And how does that even happen?
And there were lots of like nights where it was like 4 o'clock, and then somebody would be like, "Oh, this has to be done before you go home today."
Because you're
like, how is that even possible?
Yeah, exactly.
Why does that happen? That is a great question. To be honest, I don't know that I know the answer to that. It is a little disorganized.
Yeah.
I would also say, I mean, like in my professional experience, a lot of the business that I did was more wholesale based.
Okay.
So I would say our wholesalers drove the decisions. So like if there was a sales meeting that happened at 3 o'clock on Friday and they wanted something, they wanted it. It didn't matter.
Okay.
So it was like they would come to me and be like, you know, tell your team they have to stay. They need this project done by the end of today. We need to send them before we go home today. So I think but I also think that comes with like that culture of, you know, we need to be better about being like, okay, so we'll get that to you on Monday or Tuesday.
Say no, right? Yeah.
I mean, I think that, so this is the one word of advice that I give all of my students, because I think this is the one thing that I wish somebody told me. It is okay to say no. Because I didn't in the industry. I was like, yes, because I thought that's what I had to do to be successful.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the case. I'm not saying that you should say no all the time. You shouldn't say no abruptly, but there's ways to approach it where it's like, oh, well, you know, I'm not able to complete that right now. When does this really need to be done?
Yeah.
You know, so that it's a little more like, no, you can't just drop something on me at 4 o'clock on Friday and everybody's going home for summer Fridays, but I'm going to be here until 9 o'clock at night.
You're right. Because then once you say yes, like a couple of times, then you just become the yes person. And then that just feeds the whole cycle and the whole toxicity of the industry, right?
Yes.
On that note, how about you mentioned your previous boss quite inspired you quite a lot and helped you get to where you are in your career, and you wanted to impart that onto
other people,
which eventually led to your role of academia. Talk me a little bit about her or him and like how that relationship developed and like what was that about? Okay,
so she was not my first boss. So this was when I worked at a company called Towel Associates. Okay. So it was a small family-owned company. We did wholesale brands like Absorba, Juicy Couture Baby, Disney, and essentially, like, I was very young and overly ambitious.
Yeah.
And probably kind of pig-headed at the same time. I thought I knew everything. And so I started working with her, and I found that she was somebody that understood all aspects of design, product development, and production. Yeah. And I found in my previous experience, nobody understood that.
Yeah.
So, you know, we worked together pretty closely, and she started to like kind of give me things slowly, but she was a little bit of a control freak. Okay. And, you know, didn't want to like fully release the reins of the project. But I'd been there for like 5 years or something. And then finally we just had what I consider a an argument.
Okay.
Like we had it out, believe it or not. And honestly, I think it was the best thing that could have happened because, you know, we kind of came to an agreement that like, you know, yes, I was ready to do things. Yes, she was kind of willing to teach me the things I didn't know. But had I just sat back and not said anything, I don't know that would have ever happened. She's the one that referred me, you know, to get promoted. She's the one that, you know, kind of helped me along the way. We're still friends to this day after 20 years of, you know, cool. I mean, we're very close. But she essentially kind of like took me under her wing. Like I didn't have a lot of, like when I first moved to New York, I didn't have a lot of friends here. I didn't really know a lot of people. So, you know, she kind of introduced me to places. She took me places because I didn't have a car. So it was like, oh, you need whatever for your apartment. Oh, come to Jersey and we'll take you to go get things. So she helped me personally and professionally. So, you know, to this day, we're still really good friends and she still refers me for things and like lots of positive things to say about me. So...
And that's the thing, like we hear a lot about the toxicity of the relationship of this industry, but we've met so many great people in like the past you being one of them, of course, in this past 2 years that have just helped us out and like just been amazing to us as first time founders with this journey we're on. And I do think the industry as a whole does get like bad rep because of the workflow and like the burnout and the way things are done in general, but that doesn't necessarily reflect on everybody. And I think like that's what I've personally found in the like what we're doing Make the Dot. I saw a quote that's the other day on LinkedIn of all places that was like, out there's someone that's thinking of their boss and the boss doesn't even know it, and like be that boss. And I think it's like so true. Like everyone's had like a great boss in their life that doesn't even know that, and they either a great boss, like a great teacher that has inspired them in like small way, and they have no idea that they've had that impact on that person's life.
Yeah, I mean it does make a difference, and it makes your whole working environment so different. I mean, I will say, I think that's one thing about the fashion industry is yes, it is kind of toxic, but at the same time, I do think you build relationships that are forever.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still friendly with coworkers I had when we first started working at Talbot's. And
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, so because, you know, it's kind of like this camaraderie thing, you know, because you're all kind of like miserable. Yeah. So let's be miserable together. Yeah.
Made it to the other side.
All right. So like you just become really close with like a few people that kind of stick with you forever. Yeah. So no matter where you are in the industry, it's like you always have connections. You always have people to kind of refer you and kind of lift you up a little bit.
Okay. I just want to switch into academia now. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your role as a project coordinator at the academy.
So I was brought on to the academy to essentially build a program that was a little more business focused. So essentially kind of designing for market as opposed to designing for runway. So as the product development program coordinator, I'm essentially kind of have the responsibility of making sure that our product development program creates an environment that allows students to become effective assistant designers or product developers. Okay. So we're basically, the program's built to kind of get them ready to be designing for brands like Levi's, Old Navy, whatever. Sure. Because the idea is that those simple skills like technical flat sketching and creating tech packs are things that everybody does every single day. And so many people come out of college with not having any idea as to what that is. And I think that is insane.
This is maybe a question for after hours. Me and Emilie were just talking about this literally this morning on our commute. Why do you reckon there's this like such a gap between like the ethereal, like art, I'd call it, versus like you go into a brand and it's more science than anything?
How do you mean?
So the sketching route and the I'm drawing. It's all physical. It's all offline. To like the actual like what you're building the students towards. Like you're creating sketches. You're learning how to construct a garment, and you're getting them ready to go into an actual brand and go, okay, like how do I make a piece of clothing?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the thing is, I think there are majority of the jobs are more in the high street fashion, like mass fashion, compared to like luxury or couture. And compared to when you look at that and you compare that to the type of things that schools are teaching, I think majority of the schools that at least we've come across, a lot of them focus more on the artistic training side.
I think
less of the actual,
less of the technical side.
Yeah.
And I think the idea, and I will play devil's advocate here, being that I'm an academic, right? Like, so I think that's so that students have a feeling of having creative freedom.
Okay.
Because they won't have creative freedom once they leave the industry, once they leave school, once they enter the industry.
Yeah.
So, like, I agree and disagree with that at the same time. Like, I have no problem with classes that allow for creative freedom, letting you design whatever you want, not thinking about how much it's going to cost, whether a factory can make it. But I do think it's also important to have an understanding of how much it will cost, how you're going to make it, how are you going to make it for a particular price point? Because at the end of the day, 80% of students that leave college are going to end up at these brands that, need somebody to do that, right? Most, I mean, I'm not going to say all, but most that go to fashion design school are not the next Alexander McQueen. I mean, I don't mean to sound negative, but
it's the reality, right?
The reality is that the industry isn't based on that. So, yes, I want students to be able to have creative freedom, but they also need to understand what it's really like in the industry. And unfortunately, as an assistant designer, you draw technical flat sketches and you do tech packs. You don't do anything creative and fun, right? Like, and it's just so that you get comfortable with the product and understand kind of what the brand expects as far as product, so that when you are able to design something, you can design something that fits within that market. But I think a lot of universities and colleges aren't teaching that. So like that's students' first introduction to understanding kind of design engineering, so to speak.
Mm.
Thinking back when you first got into design, how would you say the students today are different to back in those days?
I mean, I think that there is a very big difference with essentially like dedication, career driven. I think this idea of kind of being able to start your own brand has become so easy. I mean, not easy for everyone. But now it's kind of like everybody just thinks, well, I don't need to work for anybody else. I can just work for myself.
Okay.
I mean, hey, you know what? I'm a big supporter. You want to work for yourself, that's fine. But I always say that you should try and work for somebody first, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And there will be things that you wish you didn't make a mistake on for yourself, and you wish you did it for a bigger brand that can financially absorb that. Whereas you might not be able to. But I mean, I think there's like, a lot more artistic freedom, but I also think that there's a lack in that kind of career dedication that was probably once there.
Where do you see the industry going in that case?
That's a very good question.
But specifically around like the role of design, like the role of the designer.
I mean, I think understanding, technology and understanding, how to design or engineer designing for a specific customer is going to be what kind of keeps people going. I think customization is going to become increasingly popular. I think that, ways of processing garments is going to have to change. And I do think that students today are going to be the ones that solve that problem. I will say that. I do think they are more tech savvy in that they are going to come up with the solutions of the product life cycle that I said that is so dreaded.
That's a great answer.
I mean, I don't know what that solution is yet, but I do think they're going to be the ones that figure it out because they are more tech savvy. They're more. I also think that one thing about the fashion industry that is really bad is that we are stuck in our ways.
Okay.
Right? Like processes have been the same processes for as long as I can remember. And students don't think that way, right? Like that's the one thing I think that's going to kind of transition as I think students think a little bit differently. So it'll force people to experiment.
What about designers? How do you think they can prepare for these changes? Like if you have to give them any advice.
As far as kind of what to learn?
Yeah, what the future looks like.
I mean, I think you just have to stay current with, like I said, technology that's happening, whether it's like garment visualization, make the dot,
You heard that, folks.
any other technology that's kind of going to make things more efficient, make things, whether it's sample making, whether it's, sourcing, the AI tools. I mean, these are all the things that are going to help along the way. So being able to use these tools efficiently is going to make things light speeds ahead. I mean, you should always be kind of learning and trying something new and all of that, because I think that's what's going to change the industry overall.
Agree. One final question. What is the biggest challenges facing academia today, in your opinion? Because academia is in a bit of a shift at the moment. There's some challenges. How do they kind of ride those waves?
I mean, I think student interest is probably the biggest issue right now. And not to say that students don't necessarily want to go to college, but the end result of college is becoming increasingly popular. So like trade schools or things that are going to make sure that you're focused on something specific to make them successful, to allow for them to do a job. And I think until universities can make sure that they are encompassing all that, it's going to be a little bit harder for universities and colleges to get students to want to come.
So do you reckon there's a shift away from you just learning a craft or learning a subject more towards more vocationally, and that's driven from students and driven from not so much the bottom, but driven from that side of things?
I do.
Okay.
I mean, it comes with how expensive college has gotten.
True.
To make sure that whatever they're investing in is going to have some output, right? So like keeping it very focused, attending schools that are going to essentially, be very specific as to what they're expected to know and learn so that they can go right into the industry. I mean, whenever we're speaking to new incoming student, I mean, I will tell you that's not even the first question a parent asks anymore. It's the first question a student asks. Like, what can I do with this degree? What kind of jobs are there for me? Where can I work? Where are the companies that are looking for students from this university? Or, do I need my bachelor's, degree in fashion? This is what I want to do. These are the questions potential students are asking. If you were to ask me that question like 7 to 10 years ago, mom and dad was asking that question, but students were not. They just were kind of like excited. Ooh, I could possibly be in fashion. Now it's, I want to be in fashion. I will think of this program, but it needs to output me something. And what is that?
Yeah, and I think that's generally a positive in my opinion. I remember when I went to university like 9 years ago, it was like you either do something more specific like medicine or law, and then like you'll be a doctor or lawyer, or you do like more higher level subjects like history, politics, economics, whatever. And then you just learn like the softer skills, like how to write essays, how to debate, all of this kind of stuff. And then you just go get like normal jobs. And there seems to be a shift more to, okay, if I'm going to do this degree and I'm going to get straddled with this debt for like the next 20 years, I actually want I don't want to be just battling I don't want softer skills. I want to like go and do this job like immediately afterwards, which is like pretty commonsensical if you think about it.
It seems like it would be, right? But it's not really the norm. But hopefully that's changing. I mean, that's part of the reason why I was like kind of adamant about keeping the program that I was building very specific to skills, because even though I would never have anything bad to say about my undergraduate degree, I will tell you that I left there being like, okay, so now what?
Yeah.
Because it sort of introduced you to fashion from all different perspectives, design, textiles, merchandising, but there was never a clear direction. So I never found my direction until I was working, right? So like, and I appreciate all that I learned, but I would say that most of my skill was definitely learned on the job as opposed to in the classroom. And you can't teach everything in a classroom, I get it, but at least if it's kind of real life based, then there's no surprise. There's not as many surprises when you leave to go to the industry.
Okay. What's one secret you tell all your students that everybody should know? Not so much a secret anymore.
What's one secret? I mean, I already kind of told you that you can say no. That's my one like rule. That's something I always tell everybody.
Just
and then my other thing is I always kind of tell people that, you know, get your foot in the door, because it doesn't matter if it's not the job that you necessarily want. Once you're exposed to other things, you're the first one to look at. I mean, again, I took my first job right out of college, and it was in technical design, and I had no interest in technical design, but I needed a job. And then when the assistant product manager quit, I called up the manager and was like, hey, would you ever consider me for that job? 3 weeks later, I was in a U-Haul moving myself to New York City. So you never know. Yeah. So, I mean, speak up. I mean, that's saying no, speaking up. These are things that I tell people. It's okay. Even if you're an assistant, you know, low man on the totem pole, you be visible.
Be visible, shoot your shot.
Yeah, because what happens if they say no? Yeah, okay, agreed. So what?
Agreed.
They say no, right? No harm, no foul.
Yeah, no, agreed. Okay, cool. On that note, thanks for being here this afternoon, Andrea.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed Andrea's story as much as we did. Thank you for listening to Makers of Fashion. We'll see you on the next episode.